This is the KFRU-Heritage-Series, celebrating our history and heritage of Columbia and Boone County. This week, a special tribute to Black History Month. The KFRU Heritage Series from News Talk 1400. KFRU.
Heritage Show today is going to be a revisit with a couple of our guests, but we haven't had them in together, and it's very appropriate that we talk to our guests. February is Black History Month, and we've decided to connect in our show this first Sunday of February. Wina Faye Albert, who we've talked to before. It's good to see you again. How are you?
It's good to see you as well.
And then also Bill Thompson, who is, I think, one of the... I think you probably, I don't know whether to blame you or credit you for what we've done in these shows for a year now. This is starting our second year, and I think you were like maybe our first guest that we had.
Well, we appreciate it because basically we feel that some of the history needs to be retold so people have a sense of what this community was really about.
Well, we're going to talk about that history, and we're going to talk about the role that you two have had working together in some of that history. And Wina Faye, I want to start with you. I'm curious. Now, I talked to Bill a moment ago, and he was telling me that it was in 1983 or so when you two first started cooperating and working together. Could you give us the story about how this started and why?
I sure will. Well, I had decided to. I just finished at Stevens.
Right.
Finally finished at Stevens, and decided that I want to go on to the university. And I had I'll tell you the real story. I had a restaurant down on 8th Street. I said, Bill, I don't know if I can do all this by myself. He said, girl, you can do it. And so that's how Bill got snookered in. And I was afraid that when I went across the stage to get my master's, that about 10 people was going to walk across with me. But they decided to stay at home. They didn't. But I started working on the project. And then Bill and I sat down and talked about some of the things that would be really fun to find out, like about Annie Fisher's house and things that I had grown up all these years. That's what really got me into the whole idea. I had grown up, and I was probably close to
Didn't want to say the age.
40-ish or so. And I thought that's terrible not to know about your neighborhood, you know, because people didn't talk about history and stuff like that when I was growing up. I mean, it's just exactly opposite of what we had heard about on what was it, Roots and those things about people sitting down and talking
and sharing
about
the stories with
their kids and all that. Now, Dad had told us some things, well, it was things we had asked him, like, did the lady that dressed in all the clothes that used to walk up and down Park Street, was she really a witch? You know, and things like that.
Wait a second.
She
Stop
had another profession.
Time. What can we say about her that would be appropriate for this? So you asked your dad about this woman.
Yeah, she dressed in all these clothes all the time, and we didn't know what she was or who she was.
And was she's probably what we imagined that she was. Is that correct?
Lady of the evening, so to speak.
Well, she was. You know what? She was really more like a old lady who. Today we'd probably call her homeless.
Okay.
Yeah, today we'd probably call her homeless. She didn't have a place, so she'd be walking, and then she'd hang out, I guess, behind somebody's house or something like that when she tried to sleep.
I see.
But us meddling kids would be up trying to figure out what she was doing, and she was probably trying to figure out what we were doing, and she'd run us.
Run you?
Yeah, she'd
chase you?
Chase us. And we wouldn't know who was that woman and how come she wore all them clothes.
So what was the story? Did you ever get the story on her?
The story, well, we came back to her. She ended up in our senior citizen program at Blind Boone Center, and they had a name for an old lady.
I can't remember that.
Witch fell in the ditch. I mean, the kids
Y'all were really cruel.
The kids made up a whole song. Not me, because I wouldn't do that. But the rest of the kids in the neighborhood called her all these little names, and she'd run you, she'd chase you. And when I got older, and we were working at Blind Boone Center, this lady ended up in our senior citizen program, and we were afraid of her. Uh-huh. We were afraid of her because we knew her from a whole different era. But she was as nice as she could be. One of the things that she would do is she'd sit down with one color and she'd paint that whole.
Remember her.
She'd paint that one page all red. Whatever color you gave her, she never asked for another color. Yeah. If you gave her green, she painted everything in green.
Oh my gosh.
And what was interesting was that she started trying to run away. She started trying to run away, and we didn't understand. She lived at the senior citizen building that used to be up on Ash.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. And her son came to town and wanted to know who Sarah Bell was first. And Sarah Bell was like, I'm Sarah Bell. He said, is somebody Faye here? And Sarah said, that's her, because she wanted somebody else to be involved. Whoever this person was, take the heat with her. And this man lived in California, and the home had been calling him saying that she had become more active, and she was starting to try to run off. Her man was starting to move again. It was because of the things we were doing with her at the center.
She was involved in the program. In other words, what Faye was saying is the senior adult program gave her the ability to get some of her mental faculties back, and it made her more vital.
So was this would have been a woman that a lot of people knew, a lot of people had seen. I mean, they may not know her name, they may not know any of her story, but each era in each town, you have individuals that you see, and you say, this is one of the, for lack of a better term, characters of this community.
You're exactly right.
Huh. It's just like Terry.
Go ahead.
It's just like Terry, the gentleman that people used to see on Providence Road about
dancing.
3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He'd be dancing on the corner, and he
remember him well.
You might remember him.
You have these unique characters that are part of the community, and Terry's story was really a unique story because he had been part of a vocal group that traveled professionally, but then he had developed throat cancer.
No, that was that's not that long ago.
No.
He has passed away. Is that correct?
Yeah, not too long ago, right.
Our guests are Wina Faye Elbert and Bill Thompson on our Heritage program. Well, Bill, let me get your story. Now, when you started working with Wina Faye, now was it because of your involvement in things like Blind Boon Center? Or
no.
Bill was a professional musician, and so Bill knew how to work all these kinds of things and do all this stuff. And I would have the program at KOPN.
Right.
And I'd been there for several years, and Bill said, well, I can help you with that part. Right. And we decided that we'd do a 10-part, which might be something you guys are interested in, a 10-part
it was a series of the history of Columbia.
Of the history of Columbia, told by the senior citizens.
On your radio program.
On my radio show. And I would develop a story around the things that they told us. Exactly. An example would be all the people who live down at Stevens Store. Stevens Store is a little community down by Millersburg. If you were going to Millersburg, you turn right.
It's right on the border of Boone and Callaway counties.
Right. If you're going to
Simpson Chapel is out there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There was a church out there. My grandmother lived out there when we were kids, and when we'd go out there, we'd get to fish and do things, slop the hogs, and get the get the eggs from and do stuff that we didn't do when we were at home in town. Yeah. So we were excited. We were going to Stevens Store. You'd have thought we were going to California.
See, if you're going out to the Millersburg exit, instead of turning right to go south to Callaway, you go north, and that's where Stevens Store was. This was an area, Boone County had a lot of strip mining. Mm-hmm. And see, this was an area where there was a pocket of the African-American community. Right. Because a lot of the times where the churches were, you had the churches and you had some small schools, but there was a population that lived there because of the jobs in that area.
Strip mining, meaning that they were getting coal.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's not a coal mine, but what you do is you shave off the land, and then basically you get the coal from that.
That's how we got
a lot of that. One of the fun things about them was that we learned about them was that they would come into, a lot of them would come into town in the mornings to go to the family church in town, and they would jump on the railroad, on the train,
and catch a train into town.
Catch a train into town, jump off when they get into Columbia, and stay in Columbia all day long. Because you'd have church first, then that afternoon, maybe you'd have a little break, and then at night you'd have another church. You'd have church service again. And so they'd stay all day, and they'd catch that train going back the other way.
What years are we talking about? What time
period? We're talking about early 1900s. See, at the time, there were a lot Columbia still had a lot of what they call toll roads around Columbia. Like Old Plank, that was a privately owned road. But see, the African Americans didn't have the money to pay these tolls a lot of times. So a lot of times they would have to take little roundabout ways to get into town.
So when you were saying they were riding the train, you mean hopping a freight train?
Oh, yes.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there was
Oh no, there wasn't
a commuter train
no,
coming
it wasn't
from
a commuter train
Stevens.
coming from Columbia or someplace.
You know, basically your Wabash, they'd catch the Wabash when it would come through. And it'd be
Families
slow
would do
enough
that
where
together.
they could jump on it. They'd just jump on one of the box cars or something like that and just ride into town until they could get off. Because money.
Yeah, we'd ride. We could ride from up at the Wabash station all the way to almost to Centralia.
Yeah.
And hop back on.
Did you just do that for fun, or was
That was
there...
for fun. That was for fun. That was just for fun.
Yeah.
Now, I think the one time that when I was growing, I worked for Head Start. The very last train ride was taken by our Head Start group.
But you all didn't hop the train.
We didn't hop the train with our Head
That would
Start
have been a
kids.
better story, you know. You would have had
would have
these
been.
little
The Head Start group
two and
tops the
3
train.
and 4-year-olds hopping on a freight train.
But
and
it
riding
just kind of has bothered me because we haven't had a group of young black kids to have that opportunity to ride on the train. Yeah, my family would take family trips, and I didn't know. I never thought about the fact when they got older that, and they were probably like 9, 10, 11, and we went up to Chicago. That was the first time they'd ever seen
Subways.
No, not subways. Just stairs that move.
Oh, stairs.
Escalators.
Escalators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when my son said to me, "Mama, these steps are moving," after I thought about it, I said, well, he's never seen. The only place in Columbia, as I grew up, that had escalators was Penny's.
Yeah.
And if little kids don't go to Penny's, they don't know anything about moving steps. So that was his first time ever doing that. So it just amazed me that those family trips really meant something.
So when we're talking about, we're going to take a break here in a moment. I want to wrap up what we started a few moments ago, and these are great stories that haven't digressed very far. But I'm curious, put in words then, Bill, when Wina Fay says that you were with her to help her with her project, Stevens College. It was a master's project.
Yeah.
So what is?
Well, she'd gone to the University of
University of
Missouri.
Missouri, graduated from Stevens, and went to the master's program at the University of Missouri. So what is the project? Community
Well,
development.
basically, working on her master's, they gave her the option of either writing a thesis or doing a creative endeavor. And Faye had become real frustrated because as far as any documentation of African American history, there was very little in the archives anywhere in town. They knew about Blind Boone, but people didn't know about John Lang. They didn't know about these other people. So she said she wanted to do a creative endeavor, and they said, "Are you serious?" Because they thought she was crazy. But, literally, because this is a big, momentous task to try and tie together a lot of African American history. And the way it was done, it was through oral history, interviewing people and listening to their stories,
pictures.
and then taking the facts that they'd given us, and then going and finding other people to help substantiate that these things were actual facts.
So you did oral history. You recorded what they had to say.
Yes.
And this was in the 80s?
In the 80s,
So you got people together, and you'd set up a microphone, and you were telling me that you'd make them feel comfortable with some donuts and stuff, and maybe something to drink, and then they'd sit around, and then they'd start telling stories.
Yeah. Those people would be the documenters most of the time. Because we'd go out and do individual families, and we'd maybe go to...
So did you just take an old reel-to-reel recorder?
Well, we had some little, the
cassette?
little small Sony cassette players, with little handhelds. Yeah.
When we could get KOPN, they would bring the reel-to-reels, and Sam would set it up and get pictures. And
I bet that's got to be Sam Griffin.
You're exactly right.
I know Sam.
You're exactly right.
He is so good with that stuff. So then how many hours of stories did you get?
Gosh, we lost track. I have to tell the story about the first interview we did. Wina Fay and Sarah Bell Jackson. Sarah Bell, she ran the senior adult program, and she was one of the mothers of the community at the time. There's a gentleman by the name of Barry Canton. Barry Canton was a very small man, older guy, and Barry Canton had some great stories about he helped work on the courthouse after it had burned, and he worked on the courthouse to help rebuild it. Okay? So they had a lot of black people in the community. And they would ask a question, and before Mr. Canton could say anything, Sarah Bell would answer, and next thing you know, these two are, instead of asking questions, they're answering all these things. So the interview, when we went back and listened to the tapes, we said, we didn't have anything we could use because y'all are talking too much.
It's Sarah Bell and I talking. That was the interview.
So basically, we had to go back and interview him. But the unique thing about it was he had some great stories because he said that they allowed a lot of the people in the black community to work on the courthouse to help rebuild it and everything. But if you had to go to the restroom, you had to go back down into the neighborhood. And if you wanted to eat, you had to go in. Well, but that was the period of time. We're talking about late 30s, early 40s.
Wow.
You know.
We're going to take a break. We'll come back and visit more. Bill Thompson is here, Wine F.A. Albert. We're talking on our Heritage Show on Black History Month at News Talk 1400 KFRU.
More coming up on News Talk 1400 KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
Well, we continue on our Heritage Show today as we talk some history of this community, especially black history, with Wine F.A. Albert and Bill Thompson. And this is, I love the story about the two interviewers not letting the interviewee get any words in. I feel like that could be me today. That's all right. If you all just take this over, I don't mind at all. All right, so during our break, you brought up something about the theaters in town.
Yes,
and you were mentioning, what was the man's name who was working on the courthouse, who could work on the courthouse? He was one of several in the black community who were laboring on the courthouse.
Mr.
But then
Barry
when it
Canton.
came time to do certain things, he'd have to go elsewhere because they would not allow him.
Well, you know, you had your white and your colored restrooms and your white and colored water fountains. So basically, at the time, if he had to go to the restroom, he had to go away from the courthouse to be able to use the restroom or do any things like this.
And that brought up something during the break, thinking about the theaters in town. So what do you want to tell us about
I think we paid like a dime, maybe a dime or a nickel to get in the show. And my dad would sell bread for a Tasty Bread Company. But all the leftover bread he could sell in the neighborhood. So he therefore had customers as well as Tasty had customers.
I see.
Well, at the Saturday morning shows, you could even sit downstairs, but you had to bring bread wrappers, and if you bought enough bread wrappers, you could win a prize.
Free.
Or you get it free, and you could win a prize. Well, I won a
watch
Dick
or
Tracy.
bracelet or Dick Tracy.
Dick Tracy.
Oh, the wrist radio
watch.
thingies? Okay.
Watch. Oh, my God, that was the best thing I could ever win. Then, what the kids didn't know was, see, Daddy sold bread, so I'd go back around to his customers, and I'd say, we used to hit, because mostly were elderly people, they couldn't get out and stuff like that, and I'd tell them, you know, Daddy is trying to help me win his bicycle, and if you guys would help me save your bread wrappers for me, I might get to win. And so they would save their bread wrappers, and we'd save our bread wrappers at home. Well, I could beat any kid in the neighborhood because I had it in.
Like you said, she wasn't one of the bad kids in there, but she just had a game.
I always had game. You know, I was always doing something, trying to raise money and things. And my dad worked for the city of Columbia. I mean, that's who he really worked for. And that was just a second job, the Tasty Bread Company. And Dad was pretty strict with us, and he'd know people in the house when we gone and all those things. Well, my sister and I were to mop the floor one day, and all the kids had to work during those days. I mean, you didn't just lay around and watch TV and stuff like that. You had if you had a TV.
Yeah.
You had to do we got one of the first little TVs in town, in our neighborhood, let me say. I never forget, Daddy got it up at
Western Auto.
Western Auto, and it was about 19 inches, I guess. About 19 inches. And in the afternoons when we get out of school, I found out that since the other kids didn't have TV, that maybe they could pay me a dime to come in and watch little TV. And they'd get to see
Winky Dink.
Winky Dink was our favorite. and
Flash Gordon.
Flash Gordon. There were four of them on it, I could see.
And Lash LaRue, don't forget.
Lash LaRue. Oh, my God.
all
With that
cowboys.
whip, he was the man. He was the man. And Miss, we had this lady in the neighborhood. She had one in every neighborhood that watched out for the kids.
Knew everything.
And she told everything she knew. And she would call Daddy at work and say, well, I've got a bunch of kids in that house. I don't know what she's doing. Well, I was collecting candy bars and change. And Dad came in there with his belt, Honey Love. I think we talked a little bit about
We
Honey
did.
Love.
We talked about Honey Love before, yep.
Everybody got a little taste of Honey Love, including Wine and Faith. Including Wine and Faith.
So the theaters that you remember then, as you were growing up, you said you even got to sit on the.
We got to sit on the bottom floor on Saturdays for the Saturday cartoons, the Saturday movies.
Yeah.
And it would always be a serial where you'd see part of it this Saturday, and then you see the other part next Saturday, and then maybe the end of the month you'd bring all your papers in from the bread, and they would count them up, and at the end they would tell everybody who the winners were.
So just on Saturday you got to sit on the main floor?
Only
so
Saturdays.
Was segregated at other times? Well,
it was segregated. We'd have to sit up in the back of the theater.
And we're talking about where Missouri Theater is now?
Oh, you didn't go to Missouri Theater unless it was something special. And my mom told me, and I heard from senior citizens that we talked to, that you didn't go to the Uptown or the Missourian unless it was something special. If you went to the Missourian, you went through you went up the back door and went up the steps that way.
I think there's a plaque there now.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you went to the Uptown Theater,
And which was the Uptown?
it was
That's the one.
up on Broadway.
Broadway and I guess
Hit
right there on the corner.
right there on the corner.
It's
right.
It's a clothing store right now.
I know where you're talking about now.
Right,
Yeah.
that's where. But it
I
had
think
to be
it's the
something
Alpine
special.
Shop now or something
That's
like
You're right.
That used to be the
That was
Theater.
the Uptown Theater.
All right.
But you only went in there. My mother said if you were, it was a special show like maybe Cinderella. Or, what was the one with the horse? The
Black Beauty or something.
Black Beauty. And she told me that you didn't just go. They'd let Doug the school out so the black kids
special
could,
days so they could
special
go.
days so they could go see those shows. Yeah. They didn't get you couldn't just go to show then.
So what were the other theaters? Could you have more access to other
You
theaters?
had more access to the other theaters, but the Hall,
Hall, yeah.
that was another one.
That's one down on
The
9th
Boone
Street.
Theater, that was on 9th Street where they sell the bakery and little bakeries in there now.
Panera.
Panera's in
That's
there.
the hall.
And then
The Boone is
of
up there
course,
where
the Blue Note was,
Blue Note was Boone.
Interesting.
the Boone Theater.
How much? I'm change focus here for just a moment. How much? Because Bill has told me you've got nearly 1,000 photos and things of. Is this concentrating on where the revitalization took place, or are these
Photos are basically
Before the revitalization.
Yeah.
This is the preliminary. These are the people who came in and took pictures of all the houses and things like that, showing the areas that they were potentially going to do land clearance.
Well, let's talk about revitalization because that's controversial and
Still
we're talking
controversial.
late 50s to early 60s, but still resonates with people today. Anytime there's the thought of eminent domain or taking property, so. Introduce us to this and what was happening then as the 50s were almost to expire, and then what happened with revitalization. Let's start with the area we're talking about is what's along Broadway. I'm sorry, Providence right now, and would be where many people know the old Osco drug is. In between that, in between the cemetery down the hill to Flat Branch.
Right, you're exactly right. And I remember during the time that we lived on 5th Street, right there on the corner of Park and 5th in that area. And we would well, you could go up to the armory, but the armory at that time was strictly military and this kind of thing. The only time you went up there was when it was biggest place in town, like if we had a weather problem or something like that. And
I see.
the people that lived down there could go in that back door over there and stay. But when you talk about the theaters, you could only go up in the back at all of those theaters that I mentioned, but the movies only cost 10 or 15 cents at the most. And we had this thing where we would kind of beat up girls that had long hair. And as I got older, I realized that was just because we were jealous because we didn't have the long, blonde, pretty hair. But if you came upstairs to use that bathroom, you got in trouble. Now, the revitalization, what I remember there is Sarah Bell's dad. I think he was
Reverend Anderson.
Yeah, he was for. We had some people in the community who was for the what do they call it?
Well, basically,
Urban
urban
renewal.
renewal.
Urban renewal.
Yeah.
And then you had a group of people who didn't. So there was a kind of a tug back and forth.
So what shape were those houses in, and were the living conditions? It probably varied a lot, but give us an idea of how varied it was.
Well, you had some houses that did need to be torn down.
Well, maybe tell them the differences in the neighborhoods, because you had the Cemetery Hill people, then you had the inner middle city, and then you had the railroad. See, there were three indigenous populations of the black community.
Across the highway.
Yeah.
It was right behind.
Highway being Highway 40.
Highway 40, yeah.
You had the group right behind McDonald's that lived up in there.
Yeah.
That was
where McDonald's is now, near Providence and the business loop.
Yeah.
All right, then you mentioned.
There are hardly any houses there. I mean, there are no houses there now.
Well, see, all of that has been moved out.
Those houses are gone.
Yeah.
There were houses on
there are no
Colorado.
houses on Cemetery Hill either, for that matter.
Yeah.
Well,
there were houses on Colorado,
that's right.
Illinois,
Yeah.
all those back streets back there behind McDonald's.
Yeah.
And I had a grandmother that lived back there.
So that was part of urban renewal also?
Oh, yeah.
That came a little bit later. You know, the first group that was moved was basically the people that were on Cemetery Hill. They were the first group that were moved. Is it over on Oak Street?
Around that area.
Yeah.
They kept everybody still in the same area. If they worked over here, like up on some of those pictures that we've got, you'd have people who were moved across 3rd Street, Providence Road, and they'd work over here, and then maybe they'd move people back over here and move those people.
So when you're saying, urban renewal came in and said these houses need to be condemned,
right?
Was the attitude, we're going to build other things here, we're going to open it up for businesses, or it was just clearing that area?
No, it was housing. It was housing. It was public housing.
It was not up to standard what the government decided as far as housing was concerned.
Some of them weren't. You had houses along where Douglas School is, up towards what is that?
Garth and
Rogers and Worley.
Rogers and Worley.
Yeah.
You had houses up in there where a number of the teachers lived. There were nice houses.
Yeah.
You had houses around on Park Street that were nice houses.
But they were all part of the track.
But they were, they were all within the track, and so all the houses went, the good ones, the bad ones. You had people who had built houses in, but I always remember talking to Miss, what's her name? She would, every time she'd tell us the same story about how they took her home. Yeah. She was one of the houses still on Providence Road when it came through, and they had a nice house. Yeah, they had a nice house, but
the
they
problem
took it.
A lot of people had was basically the amount of money that they were given. The number that I heard from most of the people that had some of the nicer homes, they were given something maybe $6,000 or $7,000.
Yeah, they couldn't
even in the early 60s or late 50s.
See, when they done eminent domain, they made a decision on how much you were getting for your house.
Right.
And that's what irritated people.
And if you didn't take it, they would do condemnation, so you lose it.
There might be $2,000.
So then
you couldn't go anywhere and buy a house with that amount.
But you were on your own then. I mean, when you said they moved them or they moved this community, you're not saying that they said we're going to tear down this, but we're going to replace it with this. Basically, what they're saying is you can go here.
Right. So, well, the problem was the people who were homeowners. The disadvantage there was once they created the public housing. If you had gotten this money for your house, you could move into public housing until your income got down to the level where you would be able to qualify.
Yeah,
where could you move to? Because basically there weren't a lot of places for these people to move. When we
done fair housing, trying to get people to be able to move everywhere, when we done protests for fair housing, I can remember us doing the protest on election day, taking people that was able to vote and to help them stay where they wanted to stay, and we had more people over here taking people for the exact opposite.
To
vote for the issue.
Yeah.
From the same community or neighbors. I mean,
both.
And what was the vote? Was the vote on people, or was the vote on issues?
It was on issues.
Yeah.
It was on issues, but we had to get people to go vote. Yeah. And a lot of those people wouldn't have voted.
So it was a popular vote then to do that urban renewal or revitalization?
No, there definitely wasn't.
I didn't think so.
It wasn't.
No. And they voted on it, I think, about 3 times.
Yeah.
Fair housing never came through right away. We had a national law and a state law, but Columbia, for some reason, couldn't get a fair housing law in Columbia.
Do you have an idea or an estimate of how many people were affected by this?
It's really difficult because basically when you look at the track, you had the Cemetery Hill Flat Branch was part of the track, and then you come across Broadway, and from Broadway down to almost what? Because even Hickman and all that was part of it, wasn't it? Right. Almost up to Wilkes Boulevard and stuff like that, and then west all the way almost to Garth, and then east almost to what, 7th or 8th Street? What was it?
6th Street.
Yeah. So when the houses were demolished or taken, and the property was through eminent domain or condemnation was taken, nothing was planned to be built in the area where they took them down?
There were plans for building. It's just that basically their concept. I talked to Sion Williams, and he said that he remembered hearing that basically they were supposed to build scatter-type housing. But when urban renewal hit Columbia, Pruitt-Igoe had become the model.
And that's
so
in,
Columbia decided to try
and
Columbia decided to make the project a little more condensed, not having the big high-rises, but still having everything more concentrated in a central area.
There were some nice houses that were lost through this.
Right.
What were the poor houses like? How bad were they?
You had houses on Providence Road, 3rd Street, that were in bad condition. I mean, when you look at some of those, they were just wood
frames. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't. I mean, some of those needed to come down.
We used to talk about chinking the cracks. You get older houses. I grew up down south, and in the winter, when winter would come, you would have a little project where you get the old newspapers, and if you could see any light, you chink it. And that's what you say. You would seal that with paper because basically
this was late 50s again, so this would be through the 50s. Yeah. We're not talking that long ago. What was their plumbing like, or what was any of that?
It was outside. It was one of the things I think I talked about when I was here before. Like I said, we lived on 5th Street, and there was a common
water faucet.
That set out there.
Yeah.
Remember I told you about?
Everybody shared it.
They had the restroom over here. I never forget Mr. Tip Tosin, who was the landowner, came down and had them build a 6-plex toilet outside. And I always wondered, because in there you had, I always remember that he built a shower, and that was on the one side, and then you had 3 toilets on this side, and you had 3 toilets on the other side. On this one side where they had the shower, I never forget it. They had like a day like today, if you want to take a shower, there was a little water heater in there. Now, I never understood why nobody ever got shot.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they didn't. They did. Told us, "I'm not taking no shower out there in that mess. Somebody's going to get killed out there."
Because there wasn't any grounding.
There wasn't no grounding, no.
I can imagine.
And then on a week like this, when it would be really bad outside and cold, our bathroom would freeze up.
Mm-hmm. And the faucet would freeze up.
Our faucet would freeze up. And my dad would get off from work. Everybody would wait till Dad got off from work, and he would unfreeze the.
He'd wrap newspaper around it and
light it.
Light it up to heat it up so that the water would run.
Everybody would come out getting their water
with their buckets and everything to get the water.
Because that's the only way they'd get. Most of them were single women, and that's where they'd get water.
We'll take a break, and we'll come back with one final segment. It's the Heritage Show. Hope you're enjoying the fact that we've had together now Bill Thompson and Wina Faye Albert. They have both been here by themselves throughout this first year of our Heritage Show. We're in our second year as we begin this interview. And stay with us. We'll finish it up after these announcements. You're listening to News Talk 1400 KFRU.
More coming up on News Talk 1400 KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
One final segment of this Heritage Show with Wina Faye Albert and Bill Thompson. And we're covering a lot of ground. And again, I think our eyes get open sometimes when we hear some of these stories that it doesn't click. And again, we're only talking 50 years ago, which it doesn't seem that long when you reach a certain age. During the announcements, Bill brought up the subject of football games and the neighborhood going to football games. I'm curious about that because I think that we haven't talked in your visits about the university and any contact with the university from the black community in Columbia. So does this approach that topic?
Yeah, it does. When we were, my dad took us to football games. He took us a lot of places, and he would take me to football games. Since I was the oldest, I got to go everywhere with Dad, and include his part-time job that we talked about earlier.
The breads.
With the bread, yeah.
But anyway, Dad would take us to the football games, and we had to sit up in the back of, the north side, the south side, where they just put all of the new area in. But that used to be hilly, real hilly.
Really?
And we would have to go and sit up in there, and you had somebody who'd climb up in the tree so they could see south, because you couldn't see down south of what was going on. If the football player ran down there,
Nobody could see.
You couldn't see down there, so somebody would have to. Well, anyway, we'd go to the football games, and over there you also didn't have to pay. But my dad was an avid Missouri fan, and he went to every football game that they had. As a matter of fact, he ended up working for the university some because of his interest in the football games. But Dad would take all of us to the games, and then all the neighbors people from the neighborhood would be there. And you couldn't go inside.
No.
So you're sitting
outside
of the stadium.
Yeah.
On which end?
On the south end. South end.
Yeah, it is. It's going
South end going south on Providence.
Yeah.
Going north on Providence.
So you were outside the stadium, basically.
Right.
Yeah. And everybody was there.
Yeah, everybody was there. I mean,
And
it
like-
wasn't
You
like
couldn't
just
see
my
the whole
family.
field.
See, there was a big old tree that used to be on the end, and
then I had
a lot of free enterprise.
I had an uncle who provided the concessions,
Yeah.
and they were usually country ham sandwiches. And we figured now that he's gone, I can say it, but we figured that he would get them from where he worked, and he'd make her basket,
And then he'd make
and
his
then
own.
he'd make his concessions up, and that was always country ham sandwiches and sodas.
Yeah.
So everybody be waiting for my uncle, I don't want to call his name, my uncle, to come to the game and bring the concessions, and some of them would holler at my dad, Savannah, when's your uncle going to get here with the stuff? Because he's the one who sold the concession. Yeah. I think country ham was like 35
rules
cents.
about who sold.
Yeah, I think country ham sandwiches were 35 cents, and soda was a dime.
So how many people are you talking that would be out there in this area watching?
Oh, shoot,
Everybody
60,
in the
70
town.
people at
Everybody
least.
in
Yeah.
And this was prior to probably so blacks couldn't get into the stadium to watch a game, and obviously the
they
team
did
was
not allow a football player.
Yeah, the
to play on
integration
field,
hadn't
so-
happened yet.
No, it
this is
definitely hadn't
definitely
happened
prior
yet.
to
Because that didn't happen until I think early '60s or so,
Right.
wasn't it? North
Right.
Stevenson.
Yeah.
And you can't believe that.
So, but you still were fans, and then you
We
still
were
went and made a
fans.
point of getting there.
I mean, tonight, their family will be together to watch the game on television. You can bet that.
Faye used to
You
say
can
that.
bet. In fact, I was insulted when they went to the SEC, because we knew that was gonna we're not gonna have the money now to go those long distances like that to the games. We could run to Kansas and down to
Nebraska, whatever,
Arkansas and those places, but we didn't have the money to go to Florida for the weekend.
yeah.
And so they just outpriced us as far as going to Missouri
Was
games.
basketball out of the question, or was there any chance to get to basketball games?
You can probably get to a lot more.
No, he's talking about
Now, in the
traditionally
old
back in
times.
the old days.
You know, I didn't do basketball very much, so I can't tell you. My son,
Yeah, and
my
I'm sure it was
brothers-
still segregated.
Yeah,
where
I'm
basically
sure it was.
the only people that would most likely get to go to the games would be the people that worked.
Yeah, that worked there.
You know, because Faye used to talk about when the city council was dealing with certain issues, they would try and mobilize the community, and this one lady,
They being
they were trying to organize to get some things done for the black community,
Okay.
and they would never be able to get a copy of the agenda. But
So we never knew when.
But
what time
didn't
it
know
was
what was gonna be
happening.
talked about at the
certain
meeting.
people worked as janitors, so they all of a sudden would get a copy of the agenda, and then all of these people would show up, and they would wonder
the right
How did you
how
know?
did they know to show up? So basically, some of the people would make sure that they knew, and then sometimes when some of the dialogue at the council meeting was going the wrong directions, they had their fainting person.
We had a person that would faint.
And it would She would faint, and it would stop all the action. In other words, that would give them a little time to back up and regroup.
And then we had a group that would
stopped what was going on,
and they would talk. Okay, yeah, what you gonna do? Plan A is not working.
While they take her outside, they'd be playing. Okay.
So you would strategize. Yeah. You would have somebody that would create a diversion.
Exactly.
You'd go out and say, "How are we going to regroup? It's not going the right way," and you'd come back in.
That's right.
Or
they'd say, we're going to give everybody a minute because they say it was too many of us to speak.
So they'd cut it down. You got 60 seconds to speak.
Yeah, to speak. And so what we do is I'd say, I give my 60 seconds to Bill Thompson. And you get up and you say, I give my... Everybody would give. So when we got through, he'd have an hour.
In about 4 or 5 minutes.
What
are the issues? Are we talking, 60s here?
What were the issues? You're talking about fair housing. You're talking about the public housing. You're talking about no streets. You're talking about no daycare for our neighborhood.
So there were issues, and that was the tactic that we have to look at the time period, because basically there was acknowledgement of the black community, but basically there was not the acknowledgement of a power base in the black community. So they had to work within
acknowledgement it was there, but not giving it a voice.
Right, exactly. Right.
We only have a minute left of this. I think we could do it again, but that's amazing. I think it's a lesson to watch out for the fainting person.
That's right. You have to do what you got to do.
Exactly.
Well, sure. That would be the strategy to do. What was your restaurant called on
A Street?
Yeah.
Faye's Soul Food.
Yeah.
Faye's Soul Food.
Faye's Soul Food.
Did you have a specialty there?
I did. We had lots of specialties. As a matter of fact,
I have to be brief, but I should have brought this up.
One of the favorite ones was chitlins and rice.
Yep.
Now that's not one that I would have. Did you raise your hand?
But John Duncan, our producer
but
of the show.
It just amazed me when people come in and wanted chitlins on the side and a thing of rice.
But she always had greens and ribs and pork steak and burgers, just full-fledged.
Well, I'm glad we talked again. I'm glad you were both together. This has been fun again and very educational and very instructional for us. Thank you, Wine of Hay Albert. Appreciate it. Bill Thompson, thank you.
Thank you.
Join us again. Feedback welcomed to the Heritage Show. And this is News Talk 1400 KFRU.
You've been listening to the KFRU Heritage Series, celebrating our history and heritage of Columbia and Boone County. Listen each Sunday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The KFRU Heritage Series. News Talk 1400 KFRU. Columbia.